Hey, ladies. So, my fault. I'm going to own it. Last week, Dr. Carmen and I were talking about why it's harder for older athletes to keep up with the younger athletes and some myths around aging. And I totally forgot to hit the record button. So, we're doing it again.
Right.
It was really an interesting topic, and we had a few ladies on there, and they had some really great questions, and I'm really sad that you guys don't get to hear their questions. But we're gonna just try to cover it all via this time. So let's jump in and talk about why it's harder for us older athletes to keep up with the younger athletes.
Sure. So when we are comparing, right, or trying to look at different levels, right, as far as ages, we always want to make sure that we're kind of comparing apples to apples, right, instead of apples to oranges.
Mm-hmm.
When we start comparing the apples to oranges, we're not on the same trajectory,
right?
If you will, right? So when we think about female athletes in their 20s versus female athletes in their 40s and 50s, there are some changes that occur in our body. And there are a lot of things that our body's very resilient, right? That we can maintain. As far as aging athletes go, we see women and men who are marathon runners, triathletes, right? Bodybuilders, weightlifters in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. So it's not like all of a sudden we hit 40 or 45 or 50 even, and all of a sudden our body's just like, nope, I can't do it anymore, right? That's just not true. What we see in the literature is that a lot of the things that we think that are associated with aging is actually associated with inactivity, right? It's not actually associated with aging. A lot of things like weakness, memory, balance changes, aches and pains. I have to tell you, one of my biggest pet peeves is when people go to the doctor and they're like, oh, they have some complaint of some symptom. And the doctor just says, oh, you're just getting older.
That pisses me off, man.
That is my biggest pet peeve because they are continuing that myth that our body breaks down. It just quits at a certain age. And that is so not true. So hopefully we can kind of address some of that, but even chronic illnesses, that doesn't just automatically occur. There's no like ticker in the background that's like, oh, you've hit 40, guess what, you've increased your risk for all these things, or now you're gonna have some chronic illness, or you're not going to be able to make the gains that you did before. So when we're comparing, what's the difference, right? We do know that there are some changes that occur in our body as we age, right? But those changes are things that we can kind of account for.
Okay.
So we do know that as we age, we do have a little bit, just a 1% to 2% change in our BMR, our basal metabolic rate.
Okay, I want to clarify with people. That's every 8 to 10 years. You're not losing 1% every year.
Yes, yeah. So that does occur, right? We see that in the literature. And also our VO2, our volume of oxygen capacity, changes when we get older. The amount that it changes is directly related to our lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the two main factors that change with anybody as we age. Some it changes a lot more than others depending on our lifestyle. But those are what kind of, I don't want to say slow things down, but change our capacity for exercise, for aerobic activity, to maintain those gains, right, within our workouts.
Yeah. And I want to like tell my athletes from like this perspective, like I am a life coach, and so I know how important mindset is, and I also know that our brain, whenever we create a belief, our brain then goes and spends its time looking for evidence to validate that belief. So when we have this belief system that as a society, collectively, we have decided is truth, that aging, as we age, we gain weight, we lose muscle, we lose our athletic ability, we can't keep up, we have aches and pains, we get gray hair, we get wrinkles. All these things are part of just aging and we have no control over them. When we believe that, we're going to create evidence to validate that, and we're going to look for evidence to validate that. So we're going to look at our 40-year-old friend, who, by the way, doesn't eat really healthy and doesn't exercise, and be like, see, she's 40, she's overweight, she's got aches and pains, having to dye my hair. Like, your belief is causing a cognitive bias that you only see that. And really, like, that's the whole point of, like, Carmen and I talking about this, is I really want to start dismantling that belief with science to show you the number of the calendar years you live does not dictate you getting gray hair, gaining weight.
Yes, that's absolutely true. So, what we see is that as we do age, right? Sorry, I had a point, I completely lost it.
Sorry.
As we age, so those changes, right, that occur, usually people say, oh, you know, when they hit a certain age, or that they hit that belief system of, oh gosh, okay, now I'm 40, this is midlife, right? Things are changing, my body's not cooperating with me anymore. What's actually what we're seeing is that when we're in our 20s and 30s, our body is much more forgiving, right? It's much more forgiving to the abuse that we usually put through our bodies, whether that means more, I mean, like poor diets, right? More warrior weekends, more unhealthy decisions, right? Or like poor lifestyle choices is what we would, you know, put that under. Even how we cope with our stress, right? Our thoughts and our belief systems. Our body is, and our brain is much more forgiving in our 20s, and 30s. And so as we do age, it would be very helpful or behoove us to be more cognizant, right, of what our lifestyle actually looks like, and what, you know, and how it's contributing to our health. So even though that 1 to 2% of change in that BMR, by having regular aerobic activity or working out on a regular basis, can actually increase what they call the exercise capacity, right? Which can override that BMR 15 to 25%.
So it increases your BMR by 15 to 25%.
Well, technically, it increases your exercise capacity.
Okay.
Which can, it's not the same thing as your BMR, but it balances out that change in BMR.
It negates the loss, the 1 to 2% that you lose every 8 to 10 years by CrossFitting or exercising. You're negating that loss.
Exactly. By maintaining that aerobic activity. Yeah, that exercise, your workouts, on a regular basis, right? So what we also see as we change in our physiology as we get older, in our 40s, and usually between 40 and 50, we start to get into that perimenopause, right, stage. So our hormones are changing. Now, there's a couple of different things. When I say hormones, it's not just our estrogen and our progesterone and our testosterone, but also our cortisol that's produced by our adrenals, as well as our thyroid can also be affected. Right? So it's kind of this culmination, and we just put it underneath this umbrella term of hormones, are changing. And so our body's trying to respond to that a little bit differently, right? So we may notice our body composition changing, right? So what I mean by that is you may not notice weight changes on the scale, but you may notice where it feels like, oh, I've got a little bit more abdominal fat, right? Or maybe my muscles are not quite as lean or as toned as they were 5-10 years ago, right? Yeah. So our body changes that because we're kind of in a different season in our life. But we can counteract that by manipulating how we eat, what we're eating, and addressing that oxidative stress that's directly lowering that VO2 max as we age. Does that
Your
make
VO2
sense?
max just doesn't like automatically lower because you're getting older. What I understand is it decreases because of oxidation in the body from stress and toxins.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Of years. It's not, I'm 38, 39. It's, I've overloaded my system, or not overloaded, I've put toxins and stress in my system, and it keeps accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. And that's creating the oxidative stress, which lowers my VO2.
Yes, yeah. So our VO2 is the oxygen, it's the volume of oxygen capacity, right? That can bind to our red blood cells. So we know that as we exercise and work out, that increases our circulation, right? It increases our circulation. That will increase the oxygen availability to our muscles, to our organs, to all of our body systems. But if that oxygen binding capacity has decreased, then by default, it's going to be lower amounts of oxygen that's even circulating throughout your body, right? And so as a result of that, that's that oxidative stress and that inflammation. And you're exactly right. We call that a bioaccumulation over time. And those toxins may be things in our water, right? In the air, in our food. Like, to be honest, we're bombarded by toxins on a regular basis in this modern world.
This time in our society, yeah.
Yeah, you can't really get away from it these days. So, but we can reverse that, right? Because our body's very resilient. So I tell folks, if you think of those toxins exposures, that oxidative stress as a bioaccumulation over time, if you begin to reduce the current exposure and address that bioaccumulation, because our body is so resilient, there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to, get back to a regenerative, healthier state as if we were, 10 or 20 years younger.
Love it.
Yes. So the other big thing, so when we're talking about the hormones and we're talking about the VO2 max, one thing that's common is stress in that hormone cortisol. And so we do see, it just kind of comes with age, I think. As we get older, we have more responsibilities in life. We've got families and jobs and careers, and things that kind of pull us in what may feel like 50 different directions, right? How we manage those stressors is really important, because that can directly increase our oxidative stress, which in turn will lower that VO2. Yes. Yeah. So I think that it's really important to be able to enjoy your workouts, right? So as you're working out, what we often see that is the most helpful in women in their 40s or 50s to maintain that muscle and to decrease the body composition changes that occur when we may feel like there's a little bit more fat being stored, is to increase that resistance training.
Yeah, what we do in CrossFit.
Yeah, that's what you guys are.
Heavy stuff and run or bike or row and lift some heavy stuff.
That's what you guys are used to, which is perfect. What I'm going to also recommend is what we see is if you're doing that weight training, do it at 100%, right?
Oh yeah, we're CrossFitters. It's like 110.
It has to be that 110%. Has to be that controlled, right? Very aware and focused positioning, because that is what's going to help to maintain that muscle tone and that muscle strength, right? Yeah. So folks are not doing it as focused and controlled. We got to make sure, that you're performing your workouts in that manner to increase those muscle gains and to maintain, because that's what we're trying to maintain, that muscle tone, and then of course increase as well.
Now, we don't want to maintain, we want gains.
We always want gains. Yeah. So this is important. In manipulating our diet just a little bit can really help with those gains as we get older, right? So we've talked about maybe it was last week. Yeah, we talked about leucine, which is an amino acid. I didn't clarify the difference between leucine and isoleucine, okay, because they are different. They're both amino acids and they're within the same family, but one has an isomer group attached to it. Okay, so leucine is helpful adding into our it'll be in the branched chain amino acids, right, as a pre-workout, because that helps to modulate the differences with our what seems more elevated progesterone, which we usually get sort of in the perimenopause, menopause state. As our estrogen decreases, our progesterone will look elevated. And when our progesterone's a little bit more elevated, it's a little bit harder for our muscles to strengthen, right?
Yeah, there's a really good book called Roar by Dr. Sims. I can't remember her name, but she talks about what progesterone does is it decreases our ability to synthesize protein, and we need to be able to synthesize protein to build muscle. And so that progesterone is kind of working against us a little bit in terms of synthesizing protein.
Yes, yeah. So we can offset that by manipulating what we eat when we eat it, right? So I wanted to bring that up because that's a way that we can work towards those gains. Another is another amino acid. It's called arginine. So arginine is an amino acid that's a precursor to nitric oxide. If you guys have heard of nitric oxide, if you're familiar with that, in the athletic world, it's very big because it can do a lot of things for our blood vessels, right? A lot of folks, yeah, it helps to dilate our blood vessels, but it can also decrease that oxidative stress. So it can increase that VO2. Right. So by making sure that we've got plenty of arginine on hand can be very helpful and to decrease that oxidative stress, which in turn will increase that VO2, right? All right. Let's see.
Silica, we talked about silica.
Yes. So we talked about when we think about aging, right? A lot of people worry about our skin, our wrinkles.
Why we all take what is it? I can see the container that it's in.
Collagen, yeah. And collagen's gotten really big on the market in the last few years because of that. But we also, as we age, we also worry about our joints, right? We also worry about knees and hips and shoulders and elbows. And so that collagen's also necessary for our joint health as well as our hair, skin, and nails. So collagen's a great thing to add into our daily routine. You know, oftentimes you can find collagen in collagen powders or protein powders. It'll be like added in, or collagen creamers I see these days. And that's a great way to go. I'm going to push it a little bit further and have you consider adding silica. It's actually a mineral that promotes the body's production of collagen. Okay. So it's just a different route to get that collagen in. So we can get collagen in, like even bone broths. I usually tell people consider adding bone broths into their weekly meal planning, as well as that collagen powder. But we want to stimulate the body's ability to produce that, especially if people are starting to get aches and pains in their joints and they're starting to see changes or they've had injuries in joints. Silica is a great thing to start to add in. You can either do that individually or sometimes as a multi-mineral supplement. Is really beneficial for people because our body doesn't need, our body is a whole person, right? And so Oftentimes by individualizing one vitamin or one mineral can help, but it doesn't always give us the whole picture, right? And so that's why I would prefer people look for a supplement that's a multi-mineral. It has all the essential minerals that we need with silica in it, right?
I will put this in the on YouTube. I will put the links. Do you have recommendations for certain ones?
Yes, I do.
And
yeah.
I'll just put the links to those ones in the description in this YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, then it'll be easier accessible for folks.
Yep.
Perfect. Yes, so those are the things where I'd start. I know that we also talked about magnesium. Magnesium is another mineral. The estimated statistics are that 80% of Americans are deficient in magnesium. And that's a huge number of people. And usually the reason why is because our body uses magnesium in over 300 biochemical reactions. So it's on a daily basis, our body's using magnesium. And usually we don't have a lot of stores because of our current conventional farming practices. And so that's why sometimes it's helpful to supplement the magnesium as well to a good nutrient dense diet so that we can get in a little bit more magnesium. And magnesium manifests usually in symptoms like constipation, poor sleep or restless sleep, anxiety, right? Depression even. If people have high blood pressure or diabetes, that can all be results of a component of that can be a result of a low magnesium. So sometimes that's something that's very helpful for everybody, but especially even those as we're aging, if we experience a lot of muscle cramps, right, or spasms, magnesium can be very helpful. Usually that's your body telling you, hey, something's out of balance. You need to build up those stores. And so that's where adding a little supplementation can be really beneficial.
When we recorded this, or when we taped this the first time, she had a very specific question about magnesium. Like, I guess there's different types.
Yes, there are different types. So magnesium is magnesium. It's just that they bind it to different types of molecules. Okay. And they do that because they're trying to target specific areas. Okay. So the most common magnesiums that you'll find are things like magnesium oxide, and that has a tendency, if you do higher doses, will cause loose stools or diarrhea. Magnesium citrate is usually one that you can find in conventional pharmacies, and they use that for constipation, right? So I tell folks, you want a combination of magnesium. You don't want 100% magnesium oxide or magnesium citrate because it's really hard to absorb those forms of magnesium. And so you're getting it more for the bowel and the bowel regularity than you are for muscle health or for mood, right? Or even for sleep. So the ones that you would prefer would be a magnesium malate. And these probably are not going to be in the cheapest supplements. The cheapest supplements of magnesium is where you're going to find the oxide and the citrate. But magnesium malate is kind of the middle of the road. Magnesium glycinate, Glycinate. Magnesium glycinate has an affinity for the mind. So that one's really beneficial for sleep, for relaxation. The malate has an affinity for the muscles. Yeah. And then there's also a magnesium threonate that can be really beneficial. So I tell folks, look for a magnesium that has at least one of those three, the glycinate, the threonate, or the malate. Okay, because then you know it's a combination. You may be able to find a chelated magnesium. That's also easier for our body to absorb, right? Because the trick with minerals is that minerals are elemental, right? So they can be a little bit harder to absorb. So we either want minerals that are attached to something that's easy to absorb biochemically, or we want minerals that come from a plant source, a plant-based source. Because that means the plant has taken the minerals from the ground, has absorbed it and used it within the chlorophyll. And so it's already more bioavailable. So keep that in mind when you're looking for a multi-mineral supplement.
Cool.
Perfect. let's see, I wanted to bring those things up. Also, we talked about this a little bit last week, but when we're trying to manipulate our diet a little bit to make sure that you have the best opportunity to make those gains, increase that muscle and that exercise or aerobic capacity. Doing that branched chain amino acids, that leucine included, aiming for 9 grams pre-workout, right? And then aiming for your protein post-workout, right? Your complete proteins. Now, we did talk about whey proteins last time. Okay, so I am a little bit picky about whey. So I want you to find a good whey protein. You want a whey isolate protein, okay? Because it usually has a little bit less inflammatory things in it, right? Not everybody tolerates whey protein well, but whey protein has the highest amount in complete proteins, and so that's why I usually have people consider the whey protein. There are a lot of plant-based proteins that I love, but usually they're missing some amino acids in there. You can also do like a paleo protein that's made from organic beef. That will also be a complete protein as well. Yeah. I meant to double check this, but you'll have to double check and see. Sometimes hemp protein will also advertise as a complete protein. And I'm not a big fan of the taste of hemp protein, but when you look at the label, you'll see the grams of each amino acid will be different. They may not be as high as the grams of amino acids in a whey or a paleo protein.
I gotcha.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So like, for example, if you're doing a soy protein, you're going to have to do twice as much soy protein. So, the 2 scoops versus 1 scoop to get the same grams of the amino acids. Okay. So you got to make sure you're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah. That's what I've just done, because I have a lot of plant-based proteins.
Yes.
Like I'll do those in the morning with my smoothie, and then post-workout, I'll switch to my Whey Isolate.
Yes, perfect. Yeah, because your body needs those ingredients when it's in that repairing, right, regenerative state post-workout. Perfect. Okay, excellent. The other thing is, what else did I want to mention? Oh, okay. So when we're manipulating our diet, right? And we're manipulating our lifestyle. So we always have to address the stress in whatever form or fashion that is, but we have to address that stress. But as far as our diet goes, to also address the cortisol production and metabolism, or the breakdown of cortisol, which directly affects how our body stores fat. We can also manipulate our protein and our carbs as well, right? So making sure that our first meal of the day is very high in soluble fiber and higher in proteins than in carbs. Okay. Because that higher amounts of proteins will help to support the natural production of cortisol, kind of our baseline. Okay. Our body naturally secretes cortisol in the morning to kind of get us up, get us going, get us motivated. And then it kind of drops off throughout the day. And then it should be its lowest at bedtime to help us sleep. Right. So in order to help us to decrease that cortisol, our afternoon snacks or meals, that's where we want to concentrate the most amount of carbs, right? So whatever protein to carb ratio that you're currently adhering to, you want to manipulate the timing during the day. So you want to do your higher carb in the afternoon, evening-ish, to reduce that cortisol to help with sleep.
Okay.
Right? We know that we need proper sleep so that our muscles can be in that regenerative state. If we're not sleeping well, if we have a restless sleep, then we're not going to be able to make those gains as well.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Any other questions?
So I want to just because I think I've coached enough people and I've talked to enough people about this, that like our brains get so locked in on this belief that the number on the number of years that we've lived is indicative to us feeling that or whatever, getting gray hair. So I just really always have to hammer this point home. So we have a podcast episode way back about aging, the myth around aging, and like this was one of the eye-opening things is when Dr. Carmen was like, gray hair is not related to aging. Gray hair is related to stress, and the higher stress, the more stress you have, the more the body robs itself of vitamins and minerals. And because of constant stress, your body has robbed your, I don't know, I guess my mechanism to make my hair color of the B vitamins. And the lack of B vitamins then creates gray hair, correct?
Right. Yes. Yep. That increase stressors, and sometimes it can be an acute stressor, right? Sometimes it doesn't, but it can also be that chronic stress that builds up over time. We deplete our stores of those B vitamins, those minerals like magnesium, and that manifests physically, right? So we'll have those hair changes, we'll get that gray hair. We may have even decreased collagen production and more wrinkles as we age. It's often caused by stress. Yeah.
I love, you always use the same example, so I'll let you use it.
I tell folks, I was like, think of our presidents, right? You see their picture when they first get elected, and then you see their picture 4 years, 8 years later, and they look like completely different people, right? That's stress, right? Yeah, that is stress, and how the stress can actually change our physical body, because usually those situations, we're not maintaining those stores of those minerals and those nutrients we need to be able to keep up with that demand of stress. So it happens to us too, just sometimes it's not as visible within those periods of times like it is in with our presidents, and we're not as public as they are, but the same mechanism is happening for folks. And we think of that as aging, right? We do know studies and studies have been done on the higher amounts of cortisol in our body, that stress response hormone, over time directly affects our aging. Right. So if people feel like, oh gosh, I've aged in the last 2 years, or I feel older than my actual calendar age is, you got to check in and see where you are with handling stress. Yeah.
And we don't really want to hear that. Like when I first met Carmen, I owned a CrossFit gym, just out of a divorce. Like I was suffering from PTSD. And she's like, you don't feel good. You don't have energy. You don't sleep well. You don't feel good because you're stressed. And I'm like, nope, not stress. Give me a supplement to feel better. Tell me what mineral I'm missing so I can feel better. She's like, it's stress. And then I started I got my life coach, and I was like, oh, it was stress. It was stress the whole time. It was stress. And chronic and long-term stress had eventually got all my chemicals off, right? Like I brought myself into adrenal fatigue, right? And so I just want to push that to you guys. Like, we want to have as much as healthy as us CrossFitters are. We still have a mentality where we want you to tell me, go take Whey Isolate, go take Arginine, and you will get your gains, and that will be it. I don't have to deal with the stress because I feel like I'm fine. I'm managing stress fine. And like the lady that was with last week when I didn't record this, she was talking about like, I just feel like my VO2 max has decreased, my cardio endurance has decreased. Right? I can't do as many burpees in the amount of time. And as we're talking, she's like, I'm 45 now. I feel like the last year it's really dropped off. And her brain is gaining evidence to show her that it's because of age. And when we start talking, it was like, she has a 5-year-old and she lost her house in a tragic event in like this year. Like, these are the things that have decreased your VO2, not because you celebrated a birthday, another trip around the sun, and it was 45.
Right.
I really want to encourage you guys, like, stress is impacting your aging, your hair color, it's impacting your performance, if you want to lift heavier, run faster, and keep up with 20 hours, you're going to have to deal with your stress. I get it. I'm 40. I have a mortgage, right? I have responsibilities, but I also know like stress is going to be the biggest hurdle that you're going to have to overcome if you want the six pack, if you want to keep up with the 20-year-olds, if you want to age well in the way you want to age.
Right.
My soapbox.
I think it's such an important message for women, though. Yeah, it's such an important message because often women end up being caretakers, right? We are usually caretakers for our family, right? We're juggling a lot of different things. You're juggling family, you're juggling kids, you're juggling parents' health, you're juggling, mortgages, your jobs, careers, businesses, even. And so we've got a lot of things in play. And yeah, I mean, if you're getting by on a regular basis, and you're rocking along thinking you're doing well, but you're not quite digging in a little bit deeper. Yeah. And so all that stress it builds up and directly, affects our physiology and our health.
And I know a lot of us, like when I'm on my soapbox, people are like, well, I don't know what to do. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to the CrossFit gym. I'm doing self-care, right? Like I exercise and make the time to exercise, right? And it's like, yes, that's good. And yes, you're eating healthy. And yes, you're drinking water. And yes, you're trying to minimize your stress, but you're still feeling stressed. And then the other component that we're missing is like, you've got to do, for me, I was doing all of it, but I wasn't managing my mind. I didn't know how, right? I didn't know that my thoughts created my emotions and my emotions drove my actions. And from my actions, I was creating the results in my life. And I didn't know, right? Like all these things. And so that's why I think it's so valuable, like to be an optimal athlete. Like you look at LeBron James, right? He has a life coach.
Yeah.
Right? They get it. It's a holistic approach. If I want to be at the top of my game, I've got to deal with the food, the health, the recovery, and the mind because you cannot separate us as a human being, right? You can't take my mind and my emotions out of my body and expect to have like optimal performance. They go together.
Right.
And I'm not like on the soapbox because I'm like, want you to be like, yeah, I want to hire you as a coach, Kim. I want you to go get the mental help you need to that's why you're here watching this is you want to be a better athlete. You want to be a better athlete, you got to invest in your brain.
Right. Exactly. I think that's what, I think it works better for folks to take that holistic approach, right? I tell folks all the time, we are not the sum of our parts, right? And sometimes that's what we get used to because in conventional medicine, it's like, oh, you're sent to specialist to specialist to specialist. It's like, well, that specialist only looks within their scope. And so it makes you feel like, oh, well, if my kidneys are fine, then everything else should be okay, right? But it's all connected. We're one human being. You can't take and remove one part without affecting other parts. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just want to mention to you guys, like, because we talked with some of our participants last time. She was talking about like doing a hormone panel, and I recommended like Dr. Carmen and I in our practice, when we get new clients that are really wanting to optimize their health, they're wanting to feel better, right? Like start achieving big goals and really like optimize their health and their life. We start them out with a neurotransmitter hormone panel, right? That we see where are your hormones, where are your neurotransmitters, like your serotonin, your dopamine, where's your cortisol? So then Dr. Carmen can help you start tackling that to get it balanced. Meanwhile, me and you work together an hour a week to start deconstructing these neurological pathways, these belief systems that are creating less than optimal results in your life and building new belief systems to get these results. And so this is a very unique program. We're different from anybody I've ever met that we do that. I tell you that, like, go to your physician or find a naturopath or reach out to Dr. Carmen or me, like, to start gathering, like, getting these panels to figure out where you're at, finding a coach, whether it be me or someone else, to start working on your ability to manage your stress in your life. That's where you're going to get the results you want in your life, is when you start doing it that holistically.
Exactly.
And my soapbox. Anything else, Dr. Carmen?
I think that covers it. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, the only difference is really our hormones and our oxidative stress. And that's just from, and both things can really be addressed and managed. So you can perform and hang with those 20-year-olds.
Yeah.
It's got to be more intentional. The older we get, the more intentional we got to be about it.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Thank you, girl.
Thank you.
See you guys next week, next Thursday, same time, 6 o'clock Central. Bye.
Bye.